Picture this. It's 1996, and it's a Friday. Your mom just got home from work, and on the way home, she stopped at Blockbuster. She goes to make you a PB&J with the crusts cut off and gives you a movie to watch while you wait. She reaches into her seemingly bottomless purse and brings out a VHS with a bright orange clamshell case. What words do you see on the cover? Harriet the Spy. Okay, that wasn't exactly how it happened to me, but while searching through some old boxes, I found my VHS copy of Harriet the Spy and put it on for some nostalgia. After it was done, though, I came away with two revelations. One, Harriet the Spy is not a kid's movie. And two, the Rugrats music video goes absolutely way too hard for what it is. One of the characters that stands out the most in this movie is Harriet's nanny, Golly. Early on, her parents are set up to be away often at fancy parties, which means Harriet is left most often in the care of Golly. Well, the obvious play here to make the audience sympathize with Harriet is to make the nanny an old, strict woman.
This is the life of a movie star. It's 20 degrees, I'm in a summer coat, and I'm laying on the wet ground.
Bronwen Hughes instead builds Harriet up by giving her a mentor who challenges her but also supports her when she feels down about something in her life and needs direction.
How long have you been with me, Golly?
Since you were born. 11 years and 12,000 tomato sandwiches ago.
The movie sets Golly up not as an antagonist, but as a mentor, lulling both Harriet and the audience into a false sense of security that she will be there for the entire movie. Harriet will always have someone to confide into with Golly. Harriet at this point is set up to be an amateur spy, who Golly is in some ways training to be more than just amateur. While the movie, and Harriet herself, tells us that she is a spy, it's clear that Golly sees past this surface-level deduction, observing people as a spy, and instead encourages Harriet to continue with this passion so that someday she will be a great writer instead. If you know anything about traditional story structure, you will know what the term the mentor's death or the mentor's departure means. It's pretty self-explanatory, but ultimately it's the time when the mentor leaves the protagonist so that the protagonist can face their final challenge on their own. Usually this happens way into the second, if not the third act, with the mentor traditionally dying or getting called away by some exterior force that forces them to leave. It's the Obi-Wan's death in Star Wars A New Hope. It's the moment where Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid uses the pain suppression technique on Danny and then has to sit and watch as he performs the crane kick. Unable to finish the last challenge for the protagonist, they must face alone. Even if you stretch the plot structure out over an entire film series, it's uncommon for the hero to have their mentor present with them in the final challenge that they face, whether it be internal or external. So what does this do for the protagonist? Number one, it gives them their own agency. Allowing the stronger and much more powerful mentor to fight alongside the hero in their final battle removes all agency and a sense of accomplishment from the hero. This can also be known as a deus ex machina, a term for when something comes in to save the hero that didn't have enough foreshadowing or realistic progression to make it seem plausible. In order for your hero to truly have grown, their final battle has to be fought alone. Otherwise, their entire arc and skill set is uselessly nullified by their stronger mentor winning the battle for them. Number two, it allows you to show how the mentor has affected the hero not just externally with an improvement in their skills, but also internally. A mentor doesn't just serve as someone who the protagonist must spar with or learn technical skills from, but also an avenue for them to explore a different way of thinking. Usually this is internally related to the dichotomy between what a hero wants and what they need. For example, in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Uncle Ben dies early on at the switch between Act 1 and Act 2, but the Amazing Spider-Man also has a mentor in Captain Stacy, Gwen's father, who dies very close to the end of the movie.
People will get hurt. Sometimes people close. So I want you to promise me something, okay? Leave Gwen out of it.
With his dying breath, he asks Peter to stay away from Gwen, understanding that the alias of Spider-Man comes with added risk to everyone around him, a fact which leads to Gwen's father's death in the first place, and ultimately, in some ways, Gwen's death at the end in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Peter agrees, signaling that the words Uncle Ben and Captain Stacy have told him have finally sunk in. The great responsibility part is not just about doing something selfless for the city, but also being able to shelve your personal life in pursuit of the larger goal of safety for Gwen. Finally, the death of a mentor sets up either a low point or an apex as the hero rises to a challenge. Sometimes when a mentor leaves or dies early in the third act, it's to bring our hero to rock bottom before they can climb their way back out, thus making the narrative arc of the characters seem much more intense. The highs of their triumph only seem as good as they are because we've been right there with them when they hit rock bottom. So at what point does Golly leave into the movie? 45, 50, 60 minutes in? 30 minutes in. That's right, we barely get time to meet her, but her impact on Harriet's life is palpable. After Harriet confides in Golly that she is struggling with her parents' absence,
It's time for bed.
Are Mom and Dad tucking me in?
No. They're at a very fancy party. And I bet they're thinking about you right now.
Golly doesn't dismiss her feelings, but she also doesn't make any bad remarks about Harriet's parents. Instead, she uses the moment to both explain the importance of their careers to Harriet, while also tying it all together by saying that her parents are probably thinking of her at the same time she is thinking about them. Following another subversion where Golly's date ends up having a good time with her and Harriet and actually being a pretty good guy, the trio return back to the house only to find that Harriet's parents have come home early and found the house abandoned without a note or any information left by Golly. The scene escalates into Harriet's mother firing Golly, something that, while is frustrating for the audience, is not entirely implausible given the rest of the situation. However, rather than ending the scene there, we instead cut to later on in the evening, where we can see Harriet spying on Golly and her parents talking.
I lost my head out there. I was just... But you can't go. I mean, we need you. Harriet would never stand for it. Please, won't you reconsider?
You know, it's not about what happened outside tonight. It really isn't.
But Golly,
I think it's time. I really do.
And instead, we see that the decision to finally leave is not a snap judgment by Harriet's mother, but instead something that Golly herself has been thinking of doing for a while, leaving Harriet so that she can grow on her own. This decision not only rationalizes all of the characters in the movie, thus making them feel more realistic and grounding the story, but also in some ways makes the heartbreak of Golly leaving even more intense. Rather than being an external force that pushes Golly to leave, it's an internal one. By having this moment come so early on in the movie, it allows more runtime for Harriet to grow and evolve as a person. Golly's departure at such an early stage causes the rest of the movie to feel much more like a cause and effect because of Harriet's actions, rather than something where she's just pulled along for the ride. Every plotline that develops from this moment on is a direct reaction to something Harriet has done or will do earlier. If you think of the internal worldview change aspect of the mentor, Golly's departure so early on in the movie is actually better for that. Rather than learning a certain lesson or way of thinking, her absence in the rest of the movie for Harriet to learn from and bounce ideas off of causes her to make many mistakes. Pigeonholing Harriet's ideas into one way of thinking for the whole movie would leave Harriet with a distinct lack of fluidity. It's unrealistic for a child of her age to stick to a certain way of thinking for the entire length of the movie, after all. Finally, Golly's leaving lulls the audience into thinking that this is Harriet's low point. At a first glance, it seems like this is the lowest down that Harriet can fall. We know that she gets outvoted to be class president, and we already can begin to depict a couple things which could be how the rest of the movie will continue. We've been introduced to many small-scale problems which could be escalated or all tied together. The debacle and constant fighting with the health authority over the cat man and his cats, and the difficulty finding freedom that the grocery store owners are having.
Come on, Ma, let me have the truck. I got a date.
What do you take me for?
Both seem like they could be tied into a larger plot, which perhaps Harriet could uncover something about. By putting this moment earlier on in the film, not only gives Harriet much more time to grow and change, but it also tricks the audience into thinking that soon we'll move on to the final act, and then when that mystery is solved by Harriet's amazing deduction skills, she will have calmed the chaos in her life and found her footing. Kids are mean. Kids are also bundles of joy. How often are both of these sides represented in the same movie? Not that often. Harriet the Spy feels so timeless in part due to the way it treats the emotions of its subjects. Harriet herself has a lot of emotions, and oftentimes we can see how those emotions get in the way of what she actually wants or needs. But also, the movie isn't afraid to show you the deeply rooted flaws in Harriet's way of life. She uses the pretense of spy in part due to her love for observation, but her observations seem much more subjective and of her own opinion than they do observations.
Well, there's Rachel Hennessy, Marion's second in command. The only thing more pathetic than being Marion Hawthorne is wanting to be Marion Hawthorne.
I think she's cool, because she spent her summer vacation growing boobs.
A man of mystery. He never talks. If I were known only by my footwear, I'd hang myself.
Her judgments about some of her classmates in particular show both the maturity of an adult mixed with the tumultuous emotionality of a child. Unable to see past what people present about themselves at school to the outside world, Harriet's observations often come in the form of snide remarks and demeaning language, even going as far as to say that if she was known for something as asinine as her clothing choices, she'd hang herself. Later on in the pivotal scene where Harriet's journal is discovered by the popular mean rich girl Marion, we get more elaboration on what exactly she's putting down in her journal.
Some of Janie's experiments really creep me out. I wonder if she'll grow up to be a billion IQ genius or a total nutcase.
Janie really creeps me out. I wonder if she'll grow up to be a total nutcase?
It seems that what we have been hearing as the audience is in some ways an idealized version of what she envisions herself to be, adding a surprising layer of maturity to the character and an example of an unreliable narrator in a film aimed at children, a rare choice. We, as the audience, never find out if the words are exactly as Harriet has written them down, or if Marion has done anything to the entries to make them feel more mean-spirited. What's most important about the scene, though, is the way that her friends react. At first, rather than satisfy their curiosity, they back her up, even with the knowledge that she has probably written about them somewhere. It's only when these entries are read aloud that they finally abandon her, showing that her friends are not siding with the rich girl out of jealousy or envy, but instead because they feel like Harriet has betrayed them, and in many ways, she has. As the film continues, we can see Harriet get ostracized and bullied more as the movie goes on. When Harriet obtains a note that was written about her saying that she stinks, she doesn't confront the people or deny the claim because deep down, the acceptance of her peers is still important to her. Her self-identity of a spy, someone who traditionally acts alone, coming into direct confrontation with their desire to be a part of her community. Harriet's actions as a result of this, at first going into the bathroom and desperately trying to clean herself, show a deep insecurity and a desire to fit in and be liked. Rather than taking the time and level-headedness to realize that this claim is nothing but slander and will probably die down soon, her intense desire to fix the problem shows that deep down she truly does care about other people and what they think of her. This insecurity is one that slowly transitions to anger. Due to the lack of a support system now that Golly and her friends are all gone, Harriet has nobody left to vent to. While she ruminates that possibly all spies and writers must confide in their writing,
I will always have a notebook. Only Golly understands this.
As an escape from the outside world, even going so far as to say at least she has notebook, personifying it to make it easier to form an attachment to, the breaking point of this anger comes at an important moment after the rest of the class forms an anti-spy club, which takes away the only outlet that Harriet had for her anger and the only place that she felt comfortable in. The constant observation and whispering about her in class only cause more mental turmoil as her paranoia and insecurity grow deeper and deeper. Finally, Harriet begins to take revenge on her classmates, doing things such as cutting hair and other villainous acts. Finally, perhaps the movie's largest theme of children having complex and detailed emotional reactions to situations is the actions her parents take after she assaults Marion in class after arguably being assaulted herself by having a paint bucket spilled on her and then the entire class messing her clothing up more and more in an environment which can only be described as overstimulating. Struggling to parent their child and unsure of what the next steps they should take, Harriet's parents take her to a child psychologist. Rather than showing us a scene where Harriet gets scrutinized or psychoanalyzed in a way that she may perceive as an attack against herself, her psychologist actually ends up giving her a creative outlet with a new notebook and later on explains to her parents that it's clear Harriet is simply reacting to a lack of stimuli and lashing out because she's angry at both herself and the world.
He says that you're fine and you're a wonderful girl and very smart and you'll be a terrific writer someday.
Oftentimes, we consider a subversion of expectations to be something that must be a large element in a film. In Harriet the Spy's case, however, subversions of who characters actually are deep down are proven wrong left and right. And if you want to subvert expectations, consider subscribing. 98% of my viewers aren't subscribed to this channel. Harriet's observations as a spy are surface level, which obviously mean they can't truly be trusted. The audience still does though, because they aren't given any other information to go off of. Since the whole story revolves around Harriet herself at this point, you're forced to take everything she says as fact. Proving these observations are wrong at the end of the movie reinforces the movie's core theme of identity and the depth of people you interact with. On a more global and business-side scale though, Harriet the Spy still subverts expectations with its characters. For example, the character who's described as poor, struggling to have enough money to buy food, and all around in a lower economic class than Harriet is not the black character Janie played by Vanessa Lee Chester, but instead Sport, the white American boy. The movie continues to subvert expectations when, after a quick reintroduction of Golly delivered this nugget of a line,
Sometimes a little lie that makes people feel better isn't really wrong. Good friends are one of life's blessings. Don't give them up without a fight.
Harriet goes to apologize to Sport and Janie, only for them to both reject her apology at the start, continuing both with the fact that kids have messy and complicated feelings and the subversion of the typical narrative story structure of a children's movie that an audience would expect. Finally, at the pivotal climax of the movie, where Harriet's action to ask if the newspaper column could be a joint venture,
Do you know how class president automatically gets to be editor of the 6th grade newspaper? I think that it's too much for one person, that it's not fair to everybody, because everybody deserves a chance.
Just how much the character has grown in regards to her knowledge of how her eventual job will possibly work and who she is as a person, it's further subverted by the actions the other kids take. For example, the first one to put their hand up in support of Harriet is not one of her previous best friends, but instead the boy with the purple socks, someone who she was arguably the most mean to in her journal.
If I were known only by my footwear, I'd hang myself.
Something else. I have something to say. I think that Harriet's a very good writer. And if we only listen to one person's opinion, we may never get anywhere new. But Harriet might have something very original. And I'd like to read what she has to write.
Now, he comes out in full support of her for everyone to see. The mean girl, Marion, is also revealed to not be rich at all, and instead only uses that as a mask because it allows her to remain popular. By having these small moments where Harriet's first opinions of people are proven wrong, it both helps Harriet grow as a character and also gives every other character in the movie a small but impactful arc from beginning to end. This life lesson about people not being who they present to the outside world can also be extended to practically every other character in the movie too, even the adults. Harriet's parents are not the wealthy, absent parents they're made out to be at the start, but instead deeply care about Harriet and her well-being. Golly's departure is subverted by her return when Harriet is truly at her lowest. Even the characters which are used for comedic relief, such as the Chinese family who own a grocery store, proven to not just be stereotypes, but instead incredibly kind people who give out free food to people that need it. Harriet remarks on this depth of everyone around her in a simple but poignant line by saying at the end,
"There's a difference between looking at stuff and really seeing it. To really see, you've got to get a closer look."
I think one of the strangest things from an outsider perspective on this movie is just how little the actual movie has to do with spying. For a movie called Harriet the Spy, Harriet's missions to gather intel and her self-identified spy skills end up not having a large impact on the climax of the movie. However, I would argue this comes more from a disconnect between marketing and the finished product than it does a fault of the writers. While the movie's beginning would lead you to believe that there is a larger conspiracy or plot that Harriet will have to overcome as the movie goes on, I think it becomes clear that the real focus of this movie is not an external, but instead an internal struggle. Asking questions such as, how does what we think about other people color our relationships and perceptions of them as time goes on? Harriet's struggle throughout the film has very little to do with her spy work and everything to do with what she thinks internally of herself and others around her. The closest thing that she does to breaking the law or spying comes at a time where Harriet feels at a slight low in her life and searching for an escape after she's left out to dry. Walking into someone else's house and looking in on them could be Harriet's way of attempting to empathize and connect with other people, and it's not altogether unlikely that Harriet has some form of neurodivergence such as autism. Getting overstimulated easily, a hyperfixation on one topic, certainly point to it being a possibility. If you're interested to learn more, I've linked a psychological paper in the description. Harriet the Spy's marketing is also confusing and gives very little information on what the movie is actually about.
Collect insects. Others collect dolls. Harriet M. Welsh collects secrets.
Instead, it simply says that Harriet collects secrets and combines that with a montage of people saying her name. It's no surprise that some viewers who expected a more outwardly presented story and external story were disappointed by the internal focus it actually ends up taking. In my opinion, though, that internal focus is what has caused the director's vision of creating a timeless classic actually stick. The internal focus means the problems that Harriet faces in this movie of acceptance, identity, and perception of other people, and their motives prove to be always relevant to the youth of today who are watching it. While obviously most people would be happy if their movie became a box office hit and they were the first one to direct a Nickelodeon feature film, I can't help but feel like this movie has something that sets it apart from a lot of other well-received movies aimed at kids, even today. In doing some research on the production of this film, it seems like the decision to shoot much of the film in Canada and shoot with a Canadian director and in some cases a Canadian cast has something to do with part of it. Not to toot my own horn here as a Canadian, but I think a lot of writers and directors in the Canadian film industry have a much deeper passion for the work than some of their American counterparts. The film industry here isn't nearly as big, and we don't have a Hollywood someone can move to make it big. It's a grueling game of working through a lot of I think that this experience means in some cases that those who get up to those high-paying positions have much more respect for the position and the people under them. It's a smaller world, and ruffling feathers doesn't get you anywhere. Hughes describes her vision for the movie as a timeless classic. Even in modernizing the story from the 1960s book, she stuck closely to what she interpreted were the problems Harriet faced internally. If you remove the typewriter from the end of the movie and update the decor, I think the story would work just as well. The multiple adaptations that have come out since then prove my point. Problems we face now are the problems future generations will likely face too. Harriet the Spy is by no means an indie movie, but I still don't think it's getting the recognition that it deserves. I would argue that it isn't a kids movie, but instead a movie about kids. The problems that characters face and the intricacy of those characters themselves both feel like they come out of something a lot more serious than an orange VHS film with 2 Rugrat music videos on either end. And also, it ends with a dance party. All good movies end with a dance party. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe or click on one of the links to see another one of my video essays, and I will see all of you in the next video. Thank you.